Happy Sunday, all. My name is Sela Siri, and I'm joining you from New Orleans, Louisiana. Welcome to another program, the Buddhist Recovery Network Academy, that we're happy to bring you monthly. Today, we're going to have Kevin Griffin join us as our guest teacher, and the topic is outside issues in all our affairs, the challenge of integrating social activism in our spiritual practice. So, our programs here at Buddhist Recovery Network are brought to you freely. All of our teachers are volunteers, and there's a lot of effort that's been going into growing these programs for you. And so, since some of you can't make it to the end of the program, I do like to give you a way to contribute dana if you'd like to at any time, whether that's today or another day. And the link is buddhistrecovery.org/donate. It's very simple to remember. And you can do this on a one-time basis or a recurring basis. So I just like to put that out there before we move into the teaching. So I'd like to introduce Kevin Griffin. He is a Buddhist teacher and author in the Theravada tradition. He's a co-founder of the Buddhist Recovery Network, and he teaches internationally across Buddhist traditions. He's been a Buddhist practitioner and in recovery for over 3 decades. His teacher training was at Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Northern California, where he still teaches his flagship Dharma and Recovery class. Besides teaching at Buddhist and other spiritual centers, Kevin works at treatment centers and is consulted with leading addiction researchers. He's written 5 books, actually, make that 6, which are each very valuable to the recovery community at large, including his latest, Buddhism and the 12 Steps, Daily Reflections, Thoughts on Dharma and Recovery. So love to welcome you, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sela Siri, and congratulations on your ordination and your new name. Beautiful name. And I was just a few minutes ago thinking how much I miss being with people, and so I'm glad I can, be with you guys at least remotely. But yeah, it gets hard sometimes. Remembering that ordinarily, if I was going to teach, I would, travel somewhere, maybe just get in my car and drive across town or drive out to Spirit Rock and, hang out. You remember that, right? Hanging out. So it's been a difficult time, and it keeps going on. But really happy that I can do this, and that the Buddhist Recovery Network has been doing these events since before we had to. So, and when you said that I teach internationally, I thought, well, yeah, I'm getting to teach even more internationally now without ever leaving my basement. So there's that. So welcome everybody. We'll begin with a short meditation, just to kind of settle, and I'll give a little instruction, and just hopefully help people to settle a bit, get more present. So wherever you are, I hope you are comfortable, making yourself comfortable in a way of sitting or standing or lying down or walking, however it's easiest for you to be present. And so unless you're walking, I'll encourage you to close your eyes or just lower your gaze and turn your attention inward. First, just feeling your body, how you're holding your body. And seeing if you can kind of settle your energy. You might use the breath to relax, maybe a couple of deep breaths with a slow exhalation. I like to use a kind of almost what I call a felt visualization, feeling the energy of my body settling and moving towards the earth. And as we do that, just acknowledging what settles and what doesn't settle. And then holding all of that with a kindness, softness, a soft presence. Whatever feelings are there, whatever energies are there, holding it all, the kind of spaciousness, gentleness, kindness, a bright awareness. And you might connect with the breath as a way of refining the attention, bringing a very specific sensation to focus on, feeling the breath at the nostrils, the touch of air, or if it's easier, just feeling the movement of chest and belly, rising and falling. And even in this process, it's natural for the mind to wander. And so, an integral part of this process is the returning to the breath when we see that the mind has wandered. the moment of recognizing that the mind is wandering is really the key moment in practice. Here we can either turn to mindfulness and letting go, the return to the breath, or we take the self-centered turn towards judgment or frustration, doubt. And so this is a critical moment to be aware that really it's natural for the mind to wander. There's nothing to judge, no need to judge. If you can keep that moment very simple, just seeing the nature of mind wandering, perhaps connecting with the felt experience of that as you come back to the present moment, back to the breath, back to the body. It can be difficult for our complicated minds to understand how simple this practice is meant to be. All right. So again, welcome everyone. See some names and faces of friends and acquaintances out there. Nice to see everyone. You know, for this past almost year and a half now, I've been offering Zoom classes twice a week, and Tuesday mornings and Friday night. And early on, I decided to just go through my book one breath at a time because it kind of makes it easy to have a topic there. But that's meant that I've been, just kind of doing steps, which is great. But I thought when I was invited to give this talk that I would venture into something else, which is certainly connected to Dharma and recovery, uh, but I think is a challenge for many of us uh, to see how to integrate this. And this is our sort of uh, interest in things beyond just the cushion and the meeting kind of. And so I take these two lines, these two phrases uh, from the 12-step literature, outside issues, which comes from the 10th tradition, says that Alcoholics Anonymous and any 12-step program has no opinion on outside issues. Hence, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. So that's a pretty, direct statement about, uh, not getting involved in politics or, uh, you know, that early on they, decided not to start treatment centers uh, and any kind of business. And yeah, but we also have this phrase from step 12 that says, at the very last phrase of step 12, that we practice these principles in all our affairs. And that suggests something else, I think, that that our recovery is not just about, staying sober, that it means more than that, that we need to live these principles. Now, this 10th tradition, I think if we look at it, it's, you know, the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy is really about protecting the program, protecting Alcoholics Anonymous. Uh, but over time, it's come to be sort of assumed that it's protecting us as individuals, that there is some risk for us as individuals, maybe in getting involved in outside issues, whatever that might be. So, I think we have to sort of look at this, what this really is implying, and what it's not implying. Uh, you know, I, I've kind of used social or spiritual principles before I got sober, sort of dis- distorted versions of spiritual principles to avoid being involved in the world. And in fact, I didn't vote until I was almost really right before I got sober. I started to vote, because something was waking up. So there's that in the 12-step world, this sort of concern and maybe even fear, which I think is what it's based in, this fear that if I get out there and get involved in social or activism or political issues, that I'm going to drink or use, that's going to trigger a relapse. And I think yeah, I mean, we need to look at what that's about, but to look also then at the Buddhist world. It's interesting that certainly there can be an attitude among Buddhists that, oh, we should sort of rise above all this, or uh, people are like, I just want to meditate, you know, or I'll shut all that out, by meditating, or I'm going to just, move to a monastery and, not deal with the world, uh, which isn't a very good, which indicates not an understanding of what monasteries are like, frankly. Uh, but, uh, but that kind of delusion, that we can somehow escape the world. And indeed, you know, nobody comes to a meditation group to be sort of preached at about politics from, uh, or to have something sort of forced on them. Uh, and this is an ongoing. This is not a theoretical question. This is an ongoing issue that I do want to talk about a little bit. Um, it can certainly alienate people if the Dharma seems to be getting mixed up with specific partisan issues. Um, but so let me. I'll take. One of the inspirations for this talk is Bhikkhu Bodhi, who wrote a really important uh, essay for the Lion's Roar magazine in 2007. You can find it online. It's called A Challenge to Buddhists. Uh, and here's one of the things he says in this. He says, Buddhist teachers often say that the most effective way we can help protect the world is by purifying our own minds, or that before we engage in compassionate action, we must attain realization of selflessness or emptiness. He says, there may be some truth in such statements, but I think it is a partial truth. In these critical times, we also have an obligation to aid those immersed in the world who live on the brink of destitution and despair. So, so let me turn to this phrase: all our all our affairs, from step 12. The whole of step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to addicts, alcoholics, to others of our kind, uh, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's making an explicit connection between a spiritual awakening and doing service. And this is certainly one of the core principles of the 12 steps, that we don't just, that in fact, to maintain our recovery, we need to do service, but it's often sort of characterized as in these very narrow terms. Um, in any case, it when we say all our affairs, I think it does open up something broader than just sponsoring people in AA or something. I think it it certainly implies that we want to practice the principles. And what are the principles? Honesty, love, tolerance, um, self examination. So we have that in the 12 steps. Buddhism also really teaches that our practice isn't just about personal liberation. This is a very narrow understanding of Dharma practice, to think it's just about me. Because when we understand karma, we understand that all of our thoughts, words, and deeds have implications that affect the world around us. The Metta Sutta, the Buddha's words on loving kindness, he says, after suggesting that we should radiate kindness over the entire world, to all beings, says, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection, the recollection of kindness and compassion. So again, not just when you're meditating, but in all your actions. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, uh, the the four foundations of mindfulness, we're told we should act in full awareness in every activity. We could say all our affairs. So the implication, perhaps, is that we should bring our spiritual values into the greater world, the world of the marketplace, of human relations, and even the power structures of society. And this is where it gets complicated. And this, I'll draw a little bit more from Bhikkhu Bodhi in his challenge to Buddhists. And near the opening, he says, I've been struck by how seldom the theme of global suffering is thematically explored in the Buddhist journals and teachings with which I am acquainted. It seems to me that we Western Buddhists tend to dwell in a cognitive space that defines the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, largely against the background of our middle-class lifestyles, as the gnawing of discontent, the ennui of oversatiation, the pain of unfulfilling relationships, or with a bow to Buddhist theory as bondage to the round of rebirths. This is typical Bhikkhu Bodhi's dense and very precise language. So, what he's saying is that, I mean, it's kind of like burn, when you hear that. Oh, Western Buddhists are basically self-centered, and perhaps, just worried about our own, oh, like I'm bored, or like, I need more fulfillment in life, uh, rather than seeing the broader implications of the Four Noble Truths, of the truth of suffering and the cause of suffering. Um, Says an exception to this tendency may be found with the engaged Buddhist movement. And then we'll come back to that a little bit. So the to put it in maybe more direct terms, Buddhism, uh, one of the fundamentals of Buddhism is morality. And certainly Buddhism and recovery, their connection is about morality. The fifth precept in Buddhism is to not use intoxicants. So it's a very nice connection, and that the cause of suffering is clinging, but that greed, hatred, and delusion, the ways we harm people, that awareness of this, and um, awakening to this, letting go of unskillful behavior is really a foundational principle, and a need, a foundation before we can really have a spiritual awakening. It's why, spiritual awakening is in step 12 and not in step 1, even though I would say that step 1 is an awakening itself. The the problem, though, when we bring morality into, you know, and try to take morality out of the personal sphere into the social sphere, is that morality is very subjective. I think the best example of this is that, you know, in the US, and perhaps in other Western cultures, you know, the right or the conservative side talks about abortion as something, as a moral issue that should be addressed legally. And there's a really good argument to be made for that, uh, you know, that abortion is a moral issue. Uh, and the left, tends to be like a typical, issue on the left is being against the death penalty, which is also a very, you know, legitimate moral issue. And so we find ourselves like, oh, well, you know, uh, what's, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to, uh, bring my morality, my spiritual values into this social and political sphere? We see that it's not so simple. And one of the things that uh, Bhikkhu Bodhi says, which is also very telling, he says, one of the problems with engaged Buddhists is that he says that while some engaged Buddhists seek fresh perspectives from the Dharma, for many, Buddhism simply provides spiritual practices to use while simultaneously espousing socio-political causes, not much different from those of the mainstream left. And so then we find ourselves in this position uh, of, oh, am I is this am I taking a moral stance now, or am I just projecting my own politics onto my morality? Uh-oh. And here's where I'll step in as the narrator of this Dharma talk to say, I didn't want to talk about this because I had something I wanted to teach you. I wanted to talk about this because I think it's a really challenging question. It's one that I struggle with, and I don't have answers, but I do think that it's something that we need to think about. So this is where things, get complicated and sticky. There's no easy answer. What seems to be core to a Buddhist response or a Buddhist recovery response to socio-political issues, as Bhikkhu Bodhi characterizes them, is that we are not responding out of greed, our own greed, hatred, and delusion, that we are as conscious as possible about our own conditioning and what's driving our response, that we especially are able to separate, and this is the hard part, certainly for me, the emotional from the spiritual, the emotions from the values. And that, I think, is as with our meditation, it's progress, not perfection, another great 12-step term. So this is where our meditation practice is so critical, right? Because it helps us to see that. This is the only way we can see what is driving me, how am I responding in this moment? Can I maintain my balance when I'm engaging someone who disagrees with me? Can I continue to practice loving kindness and mindfulness, even with someone who I think is deluded, who I think is doing harm? It's very difficult. At a certain point, we have to go back to our refuge, in the night of, and so now I'll, show that, certainly my uh, alignment is with what Bhikkhu Bodhi calls the mainstream left. And so for those who are not aligned with that, I'm speaking now not as a Dharma teacher, but I'm speaking now as a human being, a student, someone's trying to find their own way. So I'm not trying to tell you what you should do. On the night of the election in the last November, when I thought that the candidate I was supporting might lose, I went into this emotional state of despair. And then and I went, I stepped away from the media, from the TV, and I went and I lay in my bed and I just reflected on refuge. And I reflected on the fact that there is no politician, there is no uh, law, no government that is my refuge, that can, um, and that governments rise and fall, everything is impermanent, that humans are driven by greed, hatred, and delusion, and that my only refuge is the Dharma. And that I have to, when all seems lost, if I come back to the Dharma, I'm saved, frankly. You know, that's my protection. That's why it's a refuge. It's my only protection. It protects my heart. It protects my mind. uh, because I can remember that as much as I care, as much as I deeply care about suffering in the world, and believe, that certain policies are going to cause more suffering and certain policies are going to bring less suffering, all of that disappears under the larger reality of of the Dharma. And even at times having to come back to the idea of emptiness, or that the vast space of, deep time, that that the truth that this planet is just happening in a moment of cosmic time that arises and passes. Still, I can't, if I stay in that view, I can become passive and apathetic. It just, oh well, it's all empty. You know, so this is the middle way, right? I need to find that middle way between knowing that that everything is empty and impermanent, and yet at the same time not at the same time realizing that suffering is real in this moment as well, and that it is irresponsible for me to turn away from that and to just cl- claim that everything is empty and so I don't need to do anything about it. So, I have gotten in trouble at times with some people for kind of crossing the line from just speaking the Dharma to like advocating, or, um, and that's one of my failings as a teacher. I remember my father shouting at the television when Richard Nixon would come on. So I feel that I've been, I come by my response honestly. It's part of my legacy. So uh, a little bit more. I want to leave some time for people to participate. Actually, there's quite a bit more I could talk about, but just to say that one of the things that see happen, in the Buddhist world, particularly, there's been a sense again of a moral responsibility to engage certain issues, and trying to engage issues that are not partisan, but that have a clearly moral implications. And the two that I think have been really prominent in recent years are the issue of climate change and the issue of racism. And both of them, I think we can skillfully respond to uh, uh, without taking a partisan stance, but coming to out of compassion, out of uh, out of caring, out of wisdom. Um, on the in the recovery world, we also see that it's interesting that you know recovery itself is a form of social engagement. Being involved in the recovery world is a form of social engagement. and things like, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, or that, have come about, or it's a social movement that came out of, I don't know if it comes out of the recovery movement, but it comes out of a response to the problems of addiction. You know, uh, at one time, smoking was considered to be a healthy thing to do, and that fortunately, that became, uh, uh, the Surgeon General got involved in this, and now we see that there are actually skillful ways to move against harmful behaviors in a socially active way, and not just in your own program, but out there in the world. So I think this is one of the ways that we can engage our recovery in the world. And it's interesting, that initially AA was founded shortly after the end of Prohibition, and they were very conscious about not being anti-alcohol. Yet someone like Holly Whitaker, her book "Quit Like a Woman," is actually anti-alcohol, and I think it's quite interesting, because it's not at all how when I got sober, that was not at all how I was sort of taught, to approach it. But to see, yeah, that alcohol and drugs are promoted uh, in really irresponsible ways. They're made to look like glamorous things that are actually poisons, and so I think there is something positive in moving towards recovery as something beyond just a personal movement, but as a social movement. I once was saying to someone, uh, uh, another a Buddhist teacher, well, I don't feel like I'm really, I'd like to be more sort of of an engaged Buddhist. And they said, well, you are, because what you're doing by working with people in recovery is a form of social engagement. So, uh, complicated topic. Um, as I say, I don't come here trying to teach so much, but really to just sort of like bring up these kind of the contradictions, and and for us to look at how we can be of service, how we can practice these principles in all our affairs without it becoming, uh, creating conflict and creating more harm. Very, very tricky, very challenging. Um, so, I will leave it at that and open it up to see if there are any helpful suggestions or comments or questions, of course. So thank you all for listening. Time.
Well, thank you very much. I really loved thinking about this core place where Buddhism and recovery intersect around morality. And this is a strong invitation to kind of look at ethics and behavior and how those interact and how they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and thanks for keeping this great offering going. Really appreciate your work, Silasiri.
Yeah, right on. I wanted to share other offerings that Kevin is in this for life, and so there are some things I wanted to mention, and that, of course, Kevin's website, which is kevingriffin.net. The most recent book, Buddhism and the 12 Steps, Daily Reflections. And I'm going to place a link here. It looks like trying to give this to you all at once, though, is not going to work so well. So let me separate these posts that I'll be putting into chat. And then you have a couple of upcoming teachings. One at Spirit Rock, there's a day long, which you'll be doing with Vim Lasar on August 7th. And there's still space in that workshop. And also in October 24th through the 29th, you will have a residential retreat on Buddhism and recovery. And that is, I'm sorry, what's the location on that one?
It's in Northern California. It's near Santa Cruz.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so if folks are interested, I will place the links. I'm going to leave the room open a few more minutes beyond the end of the program so that people can copy those links. And I just wanted to invite you to support the Buddhist Recovery Network, to support our teacher today. And don't forget about the opportunity to give dana. I think that, that feels good all along the way. The consideration of dana, what inspires it, being able to give it when you can, and seeing how that helps our network grow, and how that grows our programs and opportunities for us to connect as a community. It feels really good to have you here. And so next month on the first Sunday, which is September 5th, we're going to have Fresh Lev White. Vimlasar will be hosting that. And so I want to invite you back next month. And thank you very much. I'm wishing you all a very grounded week and lots of opportunity for engagement. Thank you.
Thanks.